It was an ordinary Saturday morning when my daughter, Sarah, dropped the bombshell that would change everything. I was sitting in my cozy chair by the window, sipping my coffee and scrolling through the newspaper when I heard her cheerful voice on the phone. She had called to tell me that she and her family, her husband Alex and my 2 grandchildren, Emma and Lucas, were heading out for a week-long vacation. They were going to a beautiful beach resort, a trip they had been planning for months. It was supposed to be a special time for them to bond, to relax, and to enjoy the sunny shores. The excitement in her voice was unmistakable, but what followed next struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. With all the enthusiasm she could muster, Sarah casually asked, "Mom, would you mind watching Daisy while we're gone? You know she's always so happy to see you, and it would be so much easier if you could stay with her. You're the best dog sitter." Daisy was their lovable golden retriever, a dog I had grown fond of over the years. But that wasn't the issue. No, it wasn't the responsibility of looking after Daisy that bothered me. It was the implication behind the request. As Sarah's voice echoed through the phone, a wave of frustration began to stir within me. It wasn't so much about the dog sitting itself. It was the feeling that I was once again being relegated to the background. Sarah had called, not just to inform me of their trip, but to make me feel like the default option for taking care of things at home. I wasn't going on the vacation. I wasn't part of their family adventure. Instead, I was left to look after the dog while everyone else got to enjoy themselves. It hit me hard. Too hard, in fact. I had done this many times before, watching Daisy while they went on trips. It was expected of me, just like all the other times I had helped out with various requests, taking care of the house when they were away, watching the kids for a few days, or lending a hand with whatever was needed. But this time felt different. The idea of sitting at home, alone, while everyone else went off to have fun, felt like something inside me snapped. Was this what my life had come to? Was I only the caretaker, the one who stayed behind? I felt a mix of resentment and disappointment. I had been doing this for years, sacrificing my time and energy for the sake of my family. And while I loved them dearly, I couldn't ignore the deep-rooted feeling that I had been taken for granted. I had been so focused on their needs for so long that I had lost sight of my own desires. The resentment was a whisper at first, a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. But now, as Sarah's voice bubbled with excitement over the phone, that whisper grew louder. "Don't be silly, Mom. You're the best for this job," she continued, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "I know you'll love spending time with Daisy. She'll be so happy to see you." As I nodded along, pretending to be fine with the arrangement, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could keep doing this. The guilt of saying no weighed heavily on me, so I didn't object. After all, what could I say? I wasn't the kind of person to let them down. But the more I thought about it, the more it became clear to me. This was not what I wanted. It wasn't just about dog sitting. It was about the way I had been living my life. I was always the one who stayed behind. I was always the one left. I hung up the phone feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction that I couldn't shake off. The house felt emptier, quieter than before. I was stuck in the same old routine, and as Sarah's excited voice echoed in my ears, I realized I needed something more. I had been so wrapped up in everyone else's lives that I had forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. I had spent so much time taking care of others that I had neglected my own dreams and aspirations. As I glanced at Daisy lying contentedly by the door, I couldn't help but feel guilty for the thoughts creeping into my mind. I loved Daisy, and I knew Sarah had asked me out of love and trust. But deep down, I knew something had to change. The idea of staying home once again, dog-sitting while everyone else had their adventure, pushed me to a breaking point. I had given so much of myself to my family, but now I realized it was time to give something back to myself. I wasn't just going to stay home and feel sorry for myself while they enjoyed their vacation. No, I deserved more than that. And that was the moment I made a decision that would set everything in motion. As the days passed, I found myself feeling a mixture of guilt and frustration. The house felt eerily quiet without Sarah and her family bustling around, and Daisy, while a lovely companion, wasn't enough to fill the space left behind. I spent my days keeping myself busy with chores, walking Daisy in the park, and trying to put on a brave face for the world. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing in my life. It wasn't just the absence of my family. It was the absence of me. For so long, I had defined myself by my role in the family. The mother, the grandmother, the caretaker. I had always put others first, thinking that my needs could wait. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my own identity I had lost. I hadn't done anything just for me in a long time. I went through the motions of my daily routine, all the while haunted by the thought of Sarah's excited voice as she told me about their vacation plans. The idea of being left behind wasn't new, but this time it stung more than usual. The feeling of being the one who stayed home, the one who didn't get to be a part of the fun, was starting to eat away at me. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to say no to Sarah. It was too hard, too complicated. How could I possibly tell my daughter that I didn't want to stay home and take care of the dog? How could I explain that I felt left out, invisible in my own family? But as the days went by, something inside me began to shift. I was tired of being the one who was always there for everyone else, but never for myself. I began to question why I had always let my own dreams take a back seat. What was holding me back? Why couldn't I go on an adventure of my own? One evening, after I had fed Daisy and put her to bed, I sat in front of my laptop and started scrolling through travel websites. I had no particular destination in mind, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed to get away. It was time for me to have an experience of my own, to do something that would fill the emptiness I had been feeling for so long. For once, I wasn't going to be the one who stayed behind. I wasn't going to be the one who sacrificed my own happiness for others. As I looked through the travel options, the idea of going to the Maldives suddenly struck me. I had always dreamed of visiting that beautiful island paradise, but it had always seemed like an impossible fantasy. The white sandy beaches, the crystal clear waters, the luxury resorts. It was the kind of place that felt out of reach for someone like me. I had always told myself that a trip like that was only for the rich and the young, the carefree people who could afford to live without a care in the world. But why couldn't I be one of those people? Why couldn't I take a chance on something that seemed so far beyond my reach? I hesitated for only a moment, my mind swirling with doubts. The flight was expensive. Could I really justify spending that much money on myself? What would Sarah think if she found out I had booked a trip to the Maldives while she was away with her family? Would she feel hurt, betrayed, or even angry? But then, in a moment of clarity, I realized that this wasn't about them. This wasn't about Sarah or anyone else. It was about me. I had spent so many years putting my family first, always being the one to help, to give, to sacrifice. But now it was time to do something for myself. I was allowed to have dreams and desires too. I was allowed to take care of my own happiness. With a deep breath, I clicked the Book Now button. I had done it. I had booked a flight to the Maldives. The rush of excitement was immediate, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The decision felt both terrifying and exhilarating. I had no idea what to expect, but that was the beauty of it. It wasn't about knowing every detail or having everything planned out. It was about the freedom to explore, to step outside of my comfort zone, and to do something that was purely for me. The moment I confirmed my booking, a sense of peace washed over me. I had made the right choice. I wasn't just the person who stayed behind anymore. I was a woman with a plan, with a purpose. The Maldives wasn't just a vacation. It was a declaration of my own worth, my own need for adventure and self-care. It was a symbol of the change I was ready to embrace in my life. And as I sat back in my chair, staring at the confirmation email, I couldn't help but smile. The future suddenly seemed full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for myself, not for anyone else. The days flew by quickly as the trip to the Maldives approached. I found myself in a state of strange anticipation, a mixture of excitement and disbelief. I had booked the trip on a whim, a moment of impulsive clarity when I decided I deserved something more than staying behind while everyone else had fun. Now that the reality of the trip was setting in, it was time to prepare. And strangely enough, I had no idea where to start. Packing was an overwhelming task at first. For the longest time, my life had been filled with other people's needs, packing for family vacations, organizing trips for Sarah and her kids, making sure everyone else was comfortable. But now, standing in my bedroom with a suitcase in front of me, I realized something. I didn't know what I wanted for myself. I had spent so many years taking care of others that I had forgotten what it felt like to prioritize my own desires. I began by taking stock of what I would need for the Maldives: swimwear, sun protection, and lightweight clothing for the tropical climate. But as I started choosing clothes, something inside me felt strange. It wasn't just about the physical items I was packing. It was about everything I had left behind in my everyday life. I had left behind a life of obligations, of selflessness, that had consumed me for far too long. Now, I was focusing on what made me happy. The thought was exhilarating, but also a little nerve-wracking. I picked out a bright yellow swimsuit, something I would never have considered wearing in the past. I had always been self-conscious about my appearance, never quite feeling comfortable in my skin. But this time, I was determined to embrace who I was, regardless of how I looked. I wasn't packing for anyone else. I wasn't packing to fit someone else's expectations. I was packing to feel free, to feel confident in my own body and my own choices. As I organized my clothes, I also began planning the details of my trip. For years, I had relied on others to help plan the vacations: Sarah, Alex, friends. But this time, everything was on me. I researched the resort where I would be staying, carefully selecting excursions like snorkeling and visiting the local islands. I was creating an itinerary that centered entirely around my own interests. It felt like an act of rebellion, a small but significant step away from the life I had known. This was my trip, my time, and I didn't have to answer to anyone. In between packing, I found myself wondering how Sarah would react when she found out. Would she think I was being selfish for taking a vacation while she was away? Would she feel guilty about asking me to look after Daisy? I didn't want to cause any problems or upset anyone, but I knew deep down that this was something I needed to do. I couldn't be the person who was always left behind anymore. I had to live, for myself, even if it meant stepping outside my comfort zone. I made sure to arrange everything for Daisy's care while I was gone. I hired a trusted local pet sitter, someone I had used in the past for a weekend getaway. I felt a twinge of guilt at the thought of leaving Daisy behind, but I reminded myself that it was okay. Sarah had asked me to care for the dog, but I wasn't obligated to spend my entire life doing it. Daisy would be well taken care of, and I could focus on my own happiness for once. Packing took longer than I had expected. I found myself picking out outfits and accessories I hadn't thought about in years. I tried on sundresses, sandals, and even a wide-brimmed hat that made me feel glamorous for the first time in forever. I realized that I had been so caught up in my family's needs that I had forgotten how to take care of my own. This trip was a chance to rediscover a part of myself that had been buried beneath years of selflessness. When I finally zipped up my suitcase, I felt a rush of pride. I was ready. I wasn't just going on a vacation, I was embarking on a journey to reclaim my own identity. This wasn't about escaping my responsibilities. It was about embracing my right to experience life for myself. For so long, I had been content to be the background character in everyone else's story, but now I was stepping into the spotlight of my own life. I called Sarah the night before my flight, and her voice was filled with excitement as I told her about the trip. She was a bit surprised at first, but her reaction was mostly one of support. "I'm so glad you're doing this, Mom," she said. "You deserve it. I hope you have an amazing time." Her words made me feel both validated and nervous. I had made the right decision, but it still felt strange to think of myself as someone who could just pick up and go on a trip like this. As I hung up the phone, I sat quietly for a moment, staring at the packed suitcase by my door. I was leaving, tomorrow, and the excitement was finally taking over. I was ready to experience something new, something just for me. I wasn't going to be the one who stayed behind anymore. I was going to the Maldives, and I was going to make the most of every single moment. The flight to the Maldives was long, but as I sat in the plush seat of the airplane, the excitement began to build inside me. The reality of the trip was sinking in. This wasn't just a vacation. It was a chance to rediscover a part of myself that I had forgotten about. For years, I had been content with my role as the caretaker, always putting others first, always playing the supporting role in my family's story. But now, I was stepping into the lead role of my own life, and it felt exhilarating. When I arrived in the Maldives, the warm, tropical air hit me as I stepped off the plane, filling my lungs with the sweet scent of the ocean. The resort was everything. I had dreamed of luxurious, serene, and overwhelmingly beautiful. The crystal-clear waters shimmered under the golden sun, and the soft, white sand felt like powder beneath my feet. As I walked through the resort's lush grounds, I could feel the weight of everyday life beginning to lift off my shoulders. The peace and tranquility were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For the first time in a long time, I had no responsibilities. There were no errands to run, no one to take care of, no schedules to follow. It was just me, the beach, and the sound of the waves crashing gently on the shore. It felt surreal. I had spent so much of my life taking care of others that I had forgotten what it was like to live for myself. The first few days were a blur of relaxation. I spent hours lounging by the pool, sipping on tropical drinks and reading books I had, long ago, put aside. The soft hum of the resort's gentle music in the background only added to the feeling of detachment from my regular life. I didn't have to worry about cooking meals, cleaning the house, or making sure anyone else was happy. I was finally doing something just for me. On my second day, I decided to explore the local area. I booked a snorkeling excursion, something I had always wanted to do, but had never had the chance to try. As the boat sped across the open water, I felt a rush of excitement. The water was impossibly clear, and as I dove into the ocean, I was surrounded by a breathtaking underwater world. Schools of colorful fish darted past me, and vibrant coral reefs stretched out beneath the surface. It was like swimming through a dream. I felt free, alive, and completely in the moment. The weight of my past life, the responsibilities, the sacrifices, all seemed to fade away with each stroke of the water. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be someone else's caretaker. I didn't have to take care of my daughter's dog. I didn't have to worry about what Sarah or anyone else was doing. I was simply there, experiencing the world around me and rediscovering the joy of living without guilt or obligation. I was in awe of the beauty around me, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in the world I was seeing. I wasn't just an observer of life, I was a participant. As the days went on, I began to feel a shift within myself. I started to realize that this was more than just a break from my routine. This was a wake-up call. For so long, I had focused on what everyone else needed from me. I had put my own dreams and desires on hold, thinking that my role as a mother, a grandmother, and a caretaker was all that mattered. But now, in this beautiful paradise, I saw how much I had neglected myself. I had forgotten what it meant to truly live for myself. Each day, I tried something new, whether it was a spa treatment, a visit to a nearby island, or simply watching the sun dip below the horizon as I sat on the beach. Every moment felt like a luxury, and every experience reminded me of the person I used to be, the person I had almost forgotten. I started to reconnect with my own sense of wonder and curiosity, something that had been buried beneath years of putting others first. 1. Evening. As I sat by the edge of the water, watching the sky change from golden to purple, I realized how far I had come. I had always put my family's needs ahead of my own, and I had done so out of love. But I had also lost a part of myself in the process. This trip, this experience, was helping me find that part again. It wasn't selfish to live for myself. It was necessary. I was learning that I was worthy of happiness, of adventure, and of self-care. I called Sarah one evening just to check in. Her voice was warm and caring as always, and I told her a little about my trip. "It's amazing, Mom. I'm so glad. You're having this time for yourself," she said, and her words filled me with a sense of relief. I had worried about what she would think, but hearing her approval made me feel like I had made the right decision. As I hung up the phone, I looked out at the vast ocean before me. The experience of the past few days had changed me in ways I couldn't fully explain. I wasn't just taking a vacation, I was rediscovering myself. I was learning to be present in my own life again, to value my own happiness, and to embrace the freedom that comes with living for myself. For the first time in years, I felt complete. The world was vast and full of opportunities, and I was ready to embrace them. I was no longer the person who stayed behind. I was the person who was living, truly living, for herself. And that realization, as I sat there on the beach, was the most liberating feeling of all. By the third day of my trip, something had shifted inside me. The sense of peace I had initially felt was gradually transforming into something deeper. It wasn't just about relaxation anymore. It wasn't just about escaping from the everyday responsibilities that had dominated my life for so long. I realized that this trip wasn't just a break. It was a wake-up call. As I sat on the beach, the soft breeze blowing through my hair and the rhythmic sound of the waves crashing against the shore, I reflected on how far I had come. It wasn't just the physical distance between me and my everyday life that had changed. It was the emotional distance. I had come to the Maldives to get away. But now, as I watched the endless horizon before me, I realized I was also getting away from the version of myself that had always been defined by others' expectations. I was shedding a part of myself, a part that had always put everyone else's needs before my own. The realization hit me like a wave. For so many years, I had allowed myself to be defined by my role in my family. I was the mother, the grandmother, the caregiver. I had always been there for everyone else, and in doing so, I had put my own dreams and desires on the back burner. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. I did, deeply. But I had become so caught up in taking care of them that I had lost sight of who I was outside of those roles. I had neglected the things that once made me happy, the things that gave me purpose and joy outside of my family duties. As I sat on the beach that afternoon, the sun sinking low in the sky and casting a golden glow over the water, I began to understand that it wasn't selfish to put myself first. It wasn't wrong to have desires, to seek fulfillment, to take care of my own happiness. For years, I had carried the weight of guilt, thinking that if I focused on myself, I would be letting everyone else down. But here, in this paradise, I realized that taking care of myself didn't mean I was neglecting anyone else. In fact, it was the opposite. By caring for myself, I was becoming a better person, more content, more fulfilled, and better able to give to others when the time came. In that moment of clarity, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer define myself by the roles I played in other people's lives. I would not let my worth be measured by how much I gave to others, by how much I sacrificed. I would begin to live for myself again, to reconnect with the passions and desires that had been pushed aside for so long. I wasn't just going to be the person who stayed behind anymore. I was going to be someone who lived fully, who embraced joy, adventure, and self-care. As the days passed, I began to embrace this new perspective. I spent time doing things I had never made time for before. I took long walks along the beach, feeling the sand between my toes and the cool water lapping at my feet. I visited local villages, where I spoke with the residents and learned about their culture and traditions. I enjoyed the peace of the resort spa, letting go of any remaining tension in my body as I relaxed in a hot stone massage. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing from one task to another. I wasn't trying to please anyone. I was simply living in the moment, savoring every experience. Each day, I made choices for myself. I woke up when I wanted to, not when a schedule dictated it. I ate when I was hungry, not because it was time for a meal. I explored the island, not because it was expected of me, but because I wanted to. I started to realize that these simple acts of self-care were not only healing me, but also helping me reconnect with a version of myself that I had nearly forgotten. The carefree, adventurous woman who had once been curious about the world, who had wanted to experience everything life had to offer, was still inside me. I began to think about my life back home. Sarah had been right when she said I deserved this time for myself. I had spent so much of my life caring for others that I had forgotten what it meant to truly live for myself. But now, as I looked out over the vast ocean, I felt ready to go back with a new perspective. I wasn't going to return to my old habits of self-sacrifice and putting everyone else's needs ahead of my own. I would continue to give to my family, but I would also take care of myself. I would find balance. That evening, as I watched the sunset over the water, painting the sky with hues of pink and purple, I thought about how far I had come in just a few short days. The Maldives had given me more than just a vacation. It had given me a chance to rediscover myself, to reconnect with the woman I had been before I got caught up in everyone else's lives. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, I realized that I wasn't just returning home as a mother and grandmother. I was returning as a woman who had learned the importance of self-care and the importance of living for herself, too. I was ready to embrace life again, to live with purpose, and to continue my journey of self-discovery. The changes I had made during my time in the Maldives would stay with me long after the trip ended. I was no longer just the person who stayed behind. I was the person who would go forward, not just for others, but for myself as well. As the days in the Maldives began to draw to a close, a bittersweet feeling settled over me. On one hand, I couldn't wait to return home, to reunite with my family and my familiar surroundings. But on the other hand, I was reluctant to leave this new version of myself behind. The woman who had arrived in the Maldives was someone who had felt stuck, someone who had sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of others. But the woman who was about to leave was different. I had rediscovered a sense of independence, joy, and self-worth that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't ready to let go of that feeling. The final days of my trip were filled with a sense of clarity. I spent time reflecting on everything I had experienced: the quiet mornings, the beautiful sunrises, the afternoons spent in the ocean, and the peaceful evenings under the stars. It wasn't just the beauty of the Maldives that had impacted me. It was the way I had allowed myself to breathe again, to take up space, to exist without feeling guilty for doing something for myself. For so long, I had been the one who stayed behind, who played the supporting role. I had been content to take care of others, but at the cost of losing sight of who I was and what I needed. Now, I realized that I didn't have to choose between taking care of my family and taking care of myself. I could do both, but I needed to find balance. The night before I left, I sat on the beach, looking out over the calm waters. The stars above seemed to whisper their wisdom to me, a reminder that the universe was vast and full of opportunities. For the first time in years, I felt small. Not in a bad way, but in a way that reminded me how much life was waiting for me. To embrace it. I wasn't just someone's mother or grandmother. I was a woman with dreams, desires, and the right to live for herself. And that realization was liberating. When I returned home, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Sarah's family had just come back from their trip as well, and Daisy was waiting for me at the door, wagging her tail in excitement. I smiled and knelt down to greet her, but as I stood back up, I felt a shift. The house felt the same, but I felt different. I wasn't the same person who had left just a week ago. The changes I had made during my time away were subtle, but they were deep. I had learned to prioritize myself, to value my own needs and desires without guilt. And now, it was time to put those lessons into practice. Sarah and the kids were eager to hear about my trip, and I shared stories of the beautiful beaches, the adventures I had had, and the peaceful moments I had spent alone. I could see the pride in Sarah's eyes as I spoke, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for taking time for myself. I wasn't asking for permission or approval. I had given myself the gift of self-care, and it was the most valuable thing I had ever done. But it wasn't just about the trip. It was about what I had learned from it, and how I planned to carry those lessons forward. I realized that I didn't need to be the one who always stayed behind, the one who always put everyone else's needs first. I could be there for my family, but I could also be there for myself. I didn't have to live in a constant state of sacrifice. Life was about finding a balance between caring for others and caring for myself. It was about creating space for my own happiness, my own fulfillment. The days after my return were filled with a sense of calm and purpose. I found myself making small changes in my daily routine. I started saying no when I needed to, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I began to carve out time for the things I enjoyed, whether it was reading a book, going for a walk, or simply sitting in silence to reflect on my day. I found joy in the little things again, in the moments that had once seemed insignificant. Most importantly, I realized that I didn't have to be everything for everyone all the time. I could be a mother, a grandmother, a friend, but I could also be just me. I was allowed to have my own life, my own desires, and my own dreams. I didn't have to apologize for wanting to live fully. The Maldives had given me more than just a vacation. It had given me the courage to live for myself, to embrace my own worth, and to recognize that I was deserving of happiness and fulfillment. As the weeks went by, I continued to reflect on the lessons I had learned. I made sure to set boundaries, to take time for myself, and to pursue the things that brought me joy. My family noticed the change in me, how I was more present, more relaxed, and more confident. I felt more connected to my own life, and I realized that this was the woman I had always been, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. In the end, the trip to the Maldives was not just a physical journey. It was a journey of the heart. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I embraced both my role as a mother and grandmother, and my role as a woman who deserved to live fully and freely. I returned home changed, but not just in the way I had expected. I had found a piece of myself that I had been missing for so long, and now I was ready to live the rest of my life with balance, joy, and self-respect. And that, in itself, was the greatest gift of all.